Do what you want because a pirate is free. You are a pirate.
Wait, we got copyrighted by Nintendo. Sorry,
Yep.
we said the P word. I'm sorry.
Like-
I'm sorry.
Hello and welcome to This Is. I hate to say I told you so, but here I go.
You don't hate to say you told me so.
I
You love it.
to say I told you so.
Nintendo are out here with some of the spiciest news of 2024. Yuzu, it's dead, Jim. It's dead.
You did a Star Trek reference. I've been saying this for a long time, and people get all antsy in their pantsy and get mad at me when I'm like, Nintendo sucks. But this is the scummy kind of thing that they do. Let's paint a picture that I like to call context. What is Yuzu?
Yuzu is a, quote, experimental open source emulator for the Nintendo Switch. Emulators are a thing, and have been a thing for a very long time. The thing that makes Yuzu slightly different than most emulators is that it isn't a quite well-established emulator for a console that is still on sale. Basically, Yuzu has been a quite robust emulator to play modern, brand new Switch games immediately on your PC. And as you can imagine, Nintendo were not very happy about that.
Which I get, all right? You don't want people cutting into your sales because, let's face it, there's nothing illegal about emulators. There's nothing illegal about ROM.
Asterisk, unless you ask Nintendo.
Yeah. So it's legal to have ROMs as long as you own the games. Yuzu is doing the right way of having a legal emulator where they don't generate hardware keys.
There's a couple things here. So Dolphin got in some hot water a little while ago because they tried to go on to Steam. Apparently, Valve and Nintendo collaborated or basically kicked it off because inside of Dolphin, there is a key which is used to allow games to actually function, and that technically is the copyrighted piece of content. I'm certainly no expert when it comes to emulators, but my understanding is that to make an emulator to be fully legal, because you can't just take Nintendo code and copy paste it, whatever. You need to do it in what's known as a clean room environment. You need to develop the emulator by yourself without using proprietary information from a company such as Nintendo. Now, can I actually read you something that
Sure.
I think you'll really, really appreciate? This is on Nintendo's official website. Can I make a backup copy if I own the video game? You may be thinking about the backup or archival exemption under the US copyright. There is some misinformation. This is a very limited limitation. Video games do not qualify. Nintendo, for a number of years, has had the stance that any ROM, any backup, any emulator that plays Nintendo is illegal. Now, I don't think that you can really say that. You could certainly make the argument that if I go and download a random ROM online, yes, that is illegal, right? Even if you own the physical copy, the legal way to do that would be to take some kind of dumping device, put your cartridge in there, make a copy of it, copy it over to a flash cart or whatever the case is. However, Nintendo disagrees. Now, they've been a little bit more, I want to say hands off. They haven't shut down a project like this in quite a while.
No, because what they do is they find a single individual or single group and they bend them over.
Okay,
And-
all right.
They don't have to go after everyone here because they put a man in prison because Nintendo didn't want him stealing stuff.
That all brings us to today, which is with Yuzu being shut down. So I think it was last week or the week before, they announced that there was going to be a lawsuit against the founders or the makers of Yuzu. As part of the settlement, all copies of said open source emulator have been destroyed from the internet, and no one has a copy of it anywhere, and there's no way that this could ever come back in any other form. Oh, that's weird. Yuzu's site's still up. Oh, I can click
interesting.
download here. Oh, well, I would never do that because that's
Well,
illegal.
I guess one thing that could be construed as wrongdoing. For the record, I don't think this is wrong.
Give him the devil's advocate
But
argument here.
the fact that Yuzu had a Patreon and they were profiting off of this, it's not like they were like, oh, we're selling you a Switch for this money.
Right now, there are 6,800 paid members on the Yuzu Patreon, bringing in $29,000 a month. Small potatoes for a company like Nintendo. I don't know how big that team is, but I assume that it is relatively large. That's enough to kind of support a team like that. The issue that Nintendo has here is that they have basically said that it was, quote, facilitating piracy at a colossal scale. Essentially, the team behind Yuzu have completely given up. So they've agreed to pay Nintendo $2.4 million and basically say, hey, we're really bad. We definitely were pirating, and basically just completely rolled over. The company will no longer be allowed to work on Yuzu, distribute Yuzu code. All of this being said, this still needs to be approved by a judge, but odds are it is because the team's parties have already agreed to it.
2.4 million is an astronomical amount of money for a team like this.
Yeah.
Nintendo could just if a judge says no, they could just go to appeals court, forever. 2.4 is like, oh, this is the best case scenario for them.
The problem is that, you know, you say the words fair use, but like fair use is only a defense in court. That is an argument that you bring to a court when you are in a lawsuit.
I stole a cop's gun and I yelled free use, and it did not keep me out of jail. Free use, my dudes, free use. Here's why it's particularly scummy this time around for me. Yuzu was running better than a Switch was. This is why I get so angry at Nintendo. They don't want to be a better company. They want to live in their little bubble, and they want to take their ball home at the end of the day when they don't win the game. When you had your flagship game in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, it ran better day one on an emulator than it did on your native hardware. That should be your wake-up call as a company that you need to do better. And this is why I get pissed off at Nintendo. And like, you guys can say, oh, Matt just hates Nintendo and stuff like that. This is why I hate it. If you make good products and you make good content, people will pay for it. And to say like, oh, this is gonna cripple our business, as you just had like quarter after quarter of increased sales.
So there's a couple layers to this. So Nintendo claimed that Tears of the Kingdom was illegally downloaded over 1 million times in May of 2023. What they're doing here is they're arguing that there's nothing about Yuzu specifically in the past. You know, they've said that, oh, this contains like copyrighted, you know, material and code and stuff. And that is actually not really the case with Yuzu as far as Nintendo is claiming. With Yuzu, you actually have to bring your own BIOS in there, which is the actual copyrighted code. What Nintendo is saying is, hey, without our copyrighted code, this piece of software is useless. Therefore, we want to not only shut down Yuzu, but also establish the precedent that you cannot do any kind of emulators like this, that they would all be illegal. Let me actually give you the exact quote from this lawsuit that they're trying to get everyone to sign off on, right? Developing or distributing software, including Yuzu, that in its ordinary course functions only when cryptographic keys are integrated without authorization, violates the DMCA. If you create a piece of software that uses the keys, it's illegal. Yeah, that kind of makes sense. You know, you're using their copyright material. But if you create a piece of software that requires copyright material, even if you're not actually distributing it, that would also be illegal. If this is actually the case, this would pretty much invalidate a good chunk of emulators right off the bat.
This is what Nintendo does. They destroy one person, group, whatever, to send a threat to all the other ones.
Well, they could have just cease and desisted them.
Right,
They
exactly.
shut this thing down, but they did not. If the judge signs off on this and basically puts this as a precedent that, hey, emulators, even if they are not using any copyrighted material, but need that sort of BIOS file or whatever to function, are also illegal, that would broaden the scope, because the general understanding up until this point has been that emulators are pretty much okay. Theoretically, you could dump your BIOS from a Switch or whatever, or a PlayStation 1 or whatever the case is. You do that yourself and put it in there. But they're trying to say like, hey, look, if you develop a piece of software that requires our copyrighted material to function, then that should also be illegal. And that would be a quite dramatic change from the way that emulators have been understood and allowed up until this point. I gotta think that part of the reason why Nintendo went full nuclear on this is because they're talking about the Switch, which is actively on sale. If we were talking about a Wii U emulator, I don't think that they would care. It's not like, oh, we're losing theoretical virtual console revenue or whatever. It's like, no, we've lost 1 million sales of Zelda or whatever.
But I don't think they have. Like they could say, oh, it was downloaded 1 million times. What's the Venn diagram of that? Like, who downloaded it versus who bought it? I guarantee that this will cause more pirates than it would prevent them. Like you say, the source code for Yuzu is out in the wild already. I'm gonna create an LLC. All right, I'm gonna take this source code. I'm gonna make Yuzo. I'm gonna make Yuza. I'm gonna make Yeezy. Now it's Nintendo's fault because they had to give over the domain. So Nintendo didn't shut it down yet. Some guy at Nintendo's like, I'm gonna go get a cup of coffee. When I get back, you guys had better not have downloaded this.
In the short term, yes, Yuzu as a source code, free, open source thing will be floating around. Now, I understand that Nintendo were upset about them making all this money and blah, blah, but here's the thing that I think is going to be a little bit more of a long-term effect. If this really is the precedent that emulators are kind of illegal, it's hard to imagine an emulator that not only doesn't use any kind of source code that's sort of developed in a clean room environment, but also doesn't require any kind of third-party, like, you know, Nintendo native source code or anything else. If this really is just a precedent for an emulator to actually be fully legal, if this is the case, would suddenly be sky high. And most of the emulators out there that you're using on a regular basis probably wouldn't be okay if a company wanted to go after them.
I can solve all this right now. Okay. You guys aren't gonna like it. I can solve it.
Go ahead. Please do.
The blockchain. So you buy a game, you buy hardware, whatever. And your key for that lives in the blockchain.
Got it. Blockchain.
Do you remember like when it was was it Ultraviolet? When you bought a Blu-ray, you got the digital copy of it.
Are you trying to tell me that Nintendo are going to put their games on the blockchain so we can easily emulate them?
There's proof that you own this. You have a definable legal versus illegal because I purchased this. This solves the problem of digital preservation.
Here's the thing. They don't want this because they want to sell you the same copy of the game for the HD remaster.
Which is what I've been saying about Nintendo forever.
Yeah, this is all real bad. I'm curious to see what happens because the main question here is whether or not this becomes a legal precedent for other emulators. Because if this is the case, if a judge signs off, says, hey, you know what? You're right. Any emulator that requires any kind of sort of third-party thing, we need to bring in a BIOS, whatever. If it requires that, it also becomes illegal. Suddenly, that gives Nintendo, it gives Sony, it gives Microsoft, it gives anyone a big old ban hammer to smash any emulator that they don't like. Whether they want to use it, whether they want to go forward with it, who knows? But if this really is the case, not only does it knock out a very vibrant, very popular emulator in Yuzu, but on top of that, this could have a real chilling effect for other emulating projects right now. I guarantee you, every person who works on an emulator of any kind right now is looking over the shoulder and go, this might be real bad. Do we have a Patreon? Do we have any money flowing through this thing? Do we have any use for any BIOSes or any of these kind of things? If that is you, you're probably in a cold sweat right now because this could have absolutely changed emulating forever. I hope it doesn't, but man, what a Monday morning.
Hey, Nintendo, fuck you. Like, follow, subscribe, and we'll catch you in the next one. Tell us what you think and what you're going to pirate next.
Because then we will be...
Oh no, Nintendo just broke in!